Hello and welcome. I'm Frank Kaufmann. I am the director of the Professor's World Peace Academy, and with this we continue our series of interviews with prominent scholars internationally. Today we have the great privilege to have with us Acharya Shrivatsa Goswami. Acharya Goswami comes from the family of eminent scholars and spiritual leaders at Sri Radha Ramana Mandir of Vrindavan. He is a leading figure of the Vaisnava tradition, and he has participated in conferences in philosophy and culture and lectured at major universities around the world, including as a visiting scholar at Harvard University and at Heidelberg University. His book, Celebrating Krishna, was received with much acclaim. He is a director of the Viraja Prakalpa, a multidisciplinary research project that has already published 8 volumes on various facets of Vraja culture and history. Among other commitments, Goswamiji is devoted to interfaith relations worldwide and is presently working on the Alliance of Religion and Conservation. He is connected to several important international peace and environmental movements and projects. He was invited by the Archbishop of Canterbury and the President of the World Bank to represent Hinduism at an historic meeting of world religions at Lambeth Palace, London. In 2007, he was a resource person to the religious meeting of over 40 heads of state in Vienna. In 2009, he was invited as a plenary speaker at the centenary celebrations of the American Academy of Religions. In 2011, the Pope invited him to the Vatican. In 2012, he was the main speaker at Interreligious Harmony Week function at the United Nations General Assembly. Presently, Acharya Goswami serves as honorary president for Religions for Peace and is on the board of international advisors to 12 Gates Foundation. Please help me welcome Shrivatsa to the program. Hold a moment. He'll be on the phone in a moment. Acharya, welcome.
Good to hear you, Dr. Kaufmann.
Thank you very much. So we will jump right in. We'll spend 30 or 40 minutes together, see how far we get. And if there's a lot more to do, we'll have another one of these. Of course, we could do it forever, really getting to know one another. In preparation for this, I read about 40 pages of life, but it was part of a larger scholarly study on where you are, namely Vrindavan, and its sacred history, its ecological history, and the place from which the roots of your spiritual authority and ministry are. Their account.
Correct.
Okay, good, and. This is part of a larger. The book, isn't it? Or is it? It may become a book. This work that I.
No, it is already a book.
Okay. Do you want to say anything about it? The title, the chapter. I mean, the book title or the author, or for another time.
No, this is just right time actually. Since you talked about it, Professor Jack Hawley, who had been working on Indian studies, is a very senior scholar at University of Columbia, USA. And his interest in devotional literature and tradition has been very deep and very encompassing. And recently he concluded and published his study of Vrindavan, which is a sacred town for the Hindus and especially of the people who follow Krishna as their God. And in this, the title itself explains that Vrindavan, the playground of Krishna. And
That's the book.
that is the book published by the Oxford University Press.
So Oxford University Press, Columbia University, New York.
Yeah.
And the study is Vrindavan, the playground of
Krishna.
The playground of Krishna.
Yeah.
Jack Holly is the author.
Right.
And this will soon be to appear. I think you must be the envy
It has been
of,
already released. It has already been released.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
Well, I think that any of us would be honored to be the subject of even a Dell comic book, let alone the work of a Columbia University scholar for the Oxford University. So I've made half the world jealous right here, and that's good. So we know who we're fortunate enough to have on this program and on this conversation.
It is my privilege.
Thank you. So the fifth chapter of this piece. Oh, and is Professor Holly an Indologist especially, or is he just a genius? I mean, I was amazed.
Yeah, he's a genius, and he is focused on Indian studies. And almost for the last half century, he is a Harvard graduate, teaching at Columbia at the moment, and very senior man, maybe in his 70s now, and has published many volumes on Indian studies, and especially the religious traditions, social issues. And his magnum opus has been published by Harvard. It is a critical edition of the poetry of Surdas, a 16th century poet. It has been published in a couple of volumes from Harvard Oriental series, a very prestigious publication. So he is like a legend in his own lifetime, Professor Holly.
Yes, fantastic. Well, with any luck, maybe we'll keep going and learn more from him in future opportunities. I have to say, as you know, of course, you know, you've been my host. I've been to Vrindavan many times and spent days and days there under the blessed canopy in the ashram with you. And I would kind of strut around proud of myself to have been to Vrindavan. And I read this chapter. I felt so embarrassed. I was wondering if I had ever been there. So much was revealed to me through this. And so I'm very anxious to get through some of it with you. And the way I want to go, Acharya, is just just almost forward systematically. I want to touch on point by point.
Sure.
And when you hit, if I hit one that is a good springboard, if you would comment further. So the chapter is specifically on you, and this interview is specifically on you and your work and your life. And the beginning of the chapter, the name of it is called Being Shrivatsa. He's naturally starts where one should start, with your formation, and opens by describing you as in this way. He, meaning you, is by no means a single-minded traditionalist. In many ways, he defines what I have come to think of as genuinely new Vrindavan, one that is anchored in the past but open to the contours of the future. So he's describing you as, by saying by no means a single-minded traditionalist, he's certainly alluding to what must be strong traditionalism in your very manner. But we're dealing with what's happening to your place, namely Vrindavan. And so he's seeing you as kind of the embodiment of what may be the right way Vrindavan evolves. Can you?
I think that it is my privilege to be part of a family tradition which goes back minimum 500 years. And the founding fathers of Vrindavan in the early 16th century, one of them was the founding father of our family in Vrindavan. So that way, I'm really privileged and honored to be part of that lineage. And that gives me existential anchorage into the tradition, the glorious tradition of Vrindavan and the Hindu tradition and piety and philosophy and whatnot, and life itself. And then, since I was born in the middle of 20th century and exposed to modern and traditional both a kind of educations, so
Yes.
something which started in the 16th century, and I was living that, and I was growing up, and I was learning, and I was educating myself in the 20th century. So I was really privileged and fortunate to connect the two ends.
Very good. There's actually three things going on here. Like the once there's a family name, there's enormous pressure on progeny.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it isn't carrying something major, just if you know, if you're a Jewish family or an Italian family and the son's carrying the name, and there's a lot of burden of expectation just by dint of the dignity of the family.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's another entire thing in the world in which religious traditions or spiritual traditions have a very heavy demand on being faithful to the tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And in both cases, whether it's the son or the kid of a dignified family, or if it's just the pure non-familial dimensions of the persistence of a pure tradition, like a religious tradition,
Mm-hmm.
there's always people. There's always people who like. There's the kind of the wayward son spends all the money or goes out and does
Mm-hmm.
whatever doesn't do. But you're kind of it's folded into one thing. It's both the family and the tradition,
Mm-hmm.
not one or the other.
No.
And it must be. What is that like? What is that like to one's very own simple being a son is carrying the whole world of kind of eternal truth, which is what a spiritual tradition.
Yeah, you're right. And actually, what is happening that the Goswami surname is not just a existential predicament for me, but having a father like mine who was at the top of the affairs in the traditional system of the temple and family and everything, but has tremendous open-mindedness.
Mm-hmm.
So he allowed me to swim freely in the open waters. And my early education was in J. Krishnamurti's school, which is a
Yes.
very liberal, very open-minded, very non-traditional education system.
Even
Yeah,
even controversially so. I mean, he was
correct. Yeah,
an iconic.
correct.
Right.
He was a rebel
Yeah.
by
Okay.
definition.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
when there is a chance came for me to visit and learn and teach at Harvard, he was the first one to support me. He said yes. And there was a possibility that I might stay on in US, and I had migrated there with my family. There also, I did not feel the pressure that I am carrying the globe on my head or my shoulder of my own tradition or family. Although hidden undercurrent might be there, but it was not visibly on me. So that was a
Yes.
great support from my elders. But with my own choice, I got back and got grounded again. I reconnected myself with my own roots.
Yes. Yes. Now, you're. I know a little bit about. I'm always a layman around you, Acharya, but I know a little bit about not only the status but the stature of your father. He was a towering figure in every way. He was like the light of life, as holding the spiritual position he held. It wasn't only emanating from his position, but that he was such a deep embodiment of the
Right,
tradition.
right. I could not find better words than what you described right now. And in
Mm,
our family tradition and temple tradition, it is not anything de jure, but de facto you have to come to the stature. And
mm,
because he had that flair, he had that deep commitment, and he had that wide scholarship and a tremendous amount of compassion and outreach for the people. So he
mm,
could fulfill his duty as a kind of de facto head of the Chaitanya tradition. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was the founder of our religious tradition in 15th and
mm,
early 16th century. And our temple is taken as the high seat of power for that tradition. And out of Chaitanya, the global phenomena called the Hare Krishnas came out. They also subscribe to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and they have tremendous respect for our temple Radharaman in Vrindavan. So
right, right.
that way, my father had tremendous responsibility, and he carried it like a very smoothly and very naturally. It was in his
Mm,
being.
in his being. And the reason why I mentioned that briefly, and I want to bring him with us every time he's related to any part of the conversation. But for with someone with that being, it's not
Mm,
surprising. But for someone with that
mm,
position, that he was so unperturbed by you coming under the direct influence as a young impressionable
mm.
student under TMV
Right,
Murthy, who, I mean, he was an iconoclast. I think Murthy
right,
wasn't
right.
he? And so your father, if your father was
Mm.
narrow, he would not have been comfortable with you going to have a teacher with that much
I
charisma
remember
and that
I
much.
remember a conversation between my father and my teacher. I had just started my graduate work in Banaras with Professor
Mm,
Murthy, and my father made a courtesy call to him when he learned that he is in town, and so my father went and met him. I was accompanying him. So after the conversation, it was very open-minded conversation. My teacher said something very interesting. He said, Goswami ji, you have no fear. You should have no fear. My task, my spiritual task as a teacher and an honest teacher is to make him a good Vaishnav of your own tradition.
mm, mm, mm. So this was the honorableness of your teacher as well
Correct,
as
correct,
beautiful. That's
correct.
beautiful.
Mm,
Fantastic. And I don't know if we mentioned, I can't remember, but we said your dad or your father, your father.
mhm.
Of course, the his name is Purushottam
Right,
Goswami,
right.
and we encourage every listener to
Mm,
learn a lot about that great period of
mm,
time in your tradition. When I visit there, there's no. It's as though your father is just sitting there. Honestly, I have to say there's
mm.
barely any. Maybe for you there must be great absence, but for me, I hardly feel absence, I feel he's just always with us
Right.
there.
Right.
Yeah. Um, um, Let me. Here's another thing that caught my attention. And it's talking about an earlier phase of your studies, in which I guess this must have been middle school or something like that. And the sentence reads, "He, namely you, Acharya Goswami, he remembers being rebuffed by his teachers if ever he asked why anything was the way it
Hmm.
was. He should just learn it, they believed. That's all.
Hmm.
Questions just got in the way at this
Hmm.
stage. He could ask much later when he knew enough to do so
Hmm.
knowledgeably." This was the description of the period of your studies when it was mostly memorization, mostly getting the language right and the
Right.
scriptures right. Or can you tell me, is
Actually,
that tell me
in
if you
my early high school years, I exclusively
yeah
went to a traditional Sanskrit education system, and
yes
it was say, equivalent to the high school level or something. And then
hmm
you have to memorize, cram down the whole book of grammar and poetry and many other things. And
right
since I had a head start in the education, so I was quite young. I may not be even 12 or 13. At the age of 13, I finished my high school. So,
wow
so at that age, a lot of things I said, why this sound changes, why the letters change, and Sanskrit is a very technical language. So they
hmm
said, you store it for the time being. The application will come later.
yeah
And there I
now
quit. There I
uh,
quit. And
I
and
see
from there I
interesting
went to the Krishnamurti's system, which was just the opposite of it.
oh the opposite. It really was the opposite as I read. Now, very quickly before we move on, in this tiny vignette of a single sentence, um, don't you think there's something in the whole Eastern culture, Western culture, educational pedagogy thing going on
It
there?
is very crucial, and I appreciate it now. I wish I had the patience and the capacity to store more data in my stupid hard disk, which was probably not formatted properly then. I was trying to feed Microsoft data into iOS or something was happening. But the pedagogy here is that at the young age, the rules and regulations, the grammar, the mathematics, these kind of things, which are just mechanical information, they should be stored as an operating system at a young
Yes,
age,
correct. Like it's being
program.
programmed, right?
So it should be put
Yeah.
into the brain, just stored there. And after the storage,
Mm,
then you play. Then the whole system becomes user-friendly. And that is a great value. And
mm,
secondly, the focus on oral transmission of knowledge systems. That is the
yes,
key of the Indian tradition. Even today,
I see.
traditional
Mm,
pedagogy is oral. There are people
mm,
who remember, thousands of pages, printed pages, orally, you know.
I
Yeah,
see. That's
yeah,
very deep. That's
yeah.
very deep. Because, and now you've taken my mind to a huge universe. I have to control myself. But once we finally give
Mm-hmm.
up the kind of cold mechanical memorization of things, uh, later on, if I speak for myself, I guess, and it's a question for you, feel regret. Why I could have it would I'd be better off now. It's like practicing
Mm-hmm.
scales, right? I'd be better off now had I just shut down and just got it in there in its mechanical capacity. That is, Is that
Yeah,
accurate, do you think?
I agree with you. I agree with you. Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
yeah. And I'm very sympathetic to a kind of a blend of the kind of Western wide open creative, and people traditionally often think of
mm,
Confucian, just kind of
mm.
the memorization of
Right.
regulations and uh, I'll walk through a supermarket and I'll see some parent on their haunches with a 2-year-old
Mm,
saying, now, this candy that you've just opened is not yours. It belongs to the gentleman who owns
mm.
this. And I'm
Yeah,
thinking,
yeah,
just back, just like smack, that's enough, put that back. So
yeah.
anyway, it's pedagogy, especially in spiritual life, is a very, very delicate
Mm-hmm.
thing, and when you describe yourself as a blend of the flow of tradition from ancient
And as
tradition,
you and
now
as you
you
know, all the scriptural tradition, although a scripture, quote unquote, is a foreign term for the Indian spiritual tradition. It is all oral word. That's why it
mm,
is called Shruti,
ah
Shruti. For scriptures,
hmm
the word is Shruti. Shruti means the heard word.
I
It's not a
see,
written word.
I see.
It's not a written word. It is a heard word.
Mm. I see. This is fantastic because, I don't know if you recall, but one time at your ashram, I became kind of transported in a kind of place of pure knowledge when I realized that Om was above all a
Correct.
sound. And then and if you're talking about sound and the transmission of truth or being, that scripture is the exact, as you say,
Mm.
is the exact opposite in a certain way. That's very
Yeah.
profound. Let me see. I hate to rush on, but I mean every sentence is a universe. But um, so here's the thing. You were at the briefly in your university years. You were at school, which was away from your home, farther away from your home. Is that correct?
Which school? The
And
line got disrupted. Mm.
the Rajgat School, the
Rajghat
Foundation for
School.
New Education.
Yeah, that was the Krishnamurti's school.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this was also an arena of more free thought.
Of course. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Very
Because
good.
this
And
Rajghat
then
school is Krishnamurti's school.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And this is the roots. This is the roots of that. It's kind of the not the tug of war, but kind of the weave of the lanyard in your life.
Correct.
The kind of the free thought and traditional, free thought and traditional, and
Correct.
then from that you returned back to seems like a middle of the year return or middle of the college life or something. Ended up to finish your university years at the University of Allahabad. Am I
No,
correct?
Banaras.
Oh, Benares.
Yeah.
Okay, and there in Benares, you were closer to home, I believe. Closer, yes.
Closer in the traditional say, physically more away, because
Oh, okay.
Rajghat is in Banaras, is in the city of Banaras.
Oh, okay.
Rajghat is one
Okay.
particular locality of Banaras.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And the university that you finally ended up
Is Banaras.
there
Yeah.
is Benares,
Yeah.
and in the account that I studied, it's described as your first fully English speaking environment.
Actually, I had a very brief journey to Allahabad University, which I
Uh-huh.
could not adjust to. It was quite professional and job-oriented thinking of the students. So I
Mm-hmm.
could not survive there even a couple of weeks. So I just left it and then landed in Banaras University.
In Benares. Okay.
Yeah,
And it was the taste of the education there, just this kind of professional drivenness there was just
The competitiveness.
mm,
Mm.
and it seems like that. It seems like that was a stroke of good luck in your life.
It was
Sounds
great.
to me,
Yeah,
but yeah,
yeah, it was.
because in the Benares where you finally ended up, I think were all kinds of lovely parts of your being flourished there at the Benares Hindu
True,
University,
true.
and these include sports,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of music,
Yeah,
right,
right.
and even photography.
Yeah,
These were the three things that stood out,
correct.
uh, and in all three elements, sports, music, and photography,
Mm.
they strike me as elements that kind of became vehicles for the spirituality that makes your ashram so vibrant, and that your spiritual education of your followers
Mm-hmm.
is informed by, curiously enough, those roots. Holly, I hope I can find it. Holly describes the sports thing as, is being in the game is what matters.
Mm.
Being, and so now that we're speaking, you say that it was the competitiveness
Mm.
of that was distasteful,
Right.
and but here, when sports became a great love of yours, and he tells us this kind of hysterical tale of you.
Mm.
What did you do? You traded a sitar for a tennis
Correct, I
racket?
did.
So I think any of us would be happy to make that trade with you
I-
now to also. But the curiosity is that you developed this great love of sports,
Mm.
and most people think of sports as competitive, and yet Holly seems to intuit this very playful, or that being in the game is what
Right,
matters, and that's almost like Lao Tzu. It's lila, it's play.
right.
Yeah, and so it's very interesting. It's very interesting that, and he also said it was a way of being,
Mm-hmm.
that provides the resiliency for struggles also.
Mm-hmm.
That when you're contending, when you're in a sport, you're kind of your grit is awakened. Your toughness, your resourcefulness.
I think so. Yeah,
Uh, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And so it's funny to know things that people don't ordinarily attach to spiritual power
Mm.
comes from curious
Mm-hmm.
places.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, um, if there's anything you want to say, or there's another thought. There's a couple of thoughts I had on the photography as
Now, I'll
well,
just
but
add to this
uh,
that spirituality is not a dissected expression of life. It is,
mm,
it permeates the total being, actually. All different dimensions, how the person is living and how somebody is experiencing, how they are expressing. So, so
mm,
all these things become part of that. Just that I
mm.
wanted to add. Yeah.
I think Indian a more natural grasp wholeness. Spirituality lives and swims and speaks integrated organism that we are. Is right?
Right,
Whereas
right.
in the West we kind of line up things. Oh, now it's
Mm.
home time,
Right,
and
right.
it's just another thing, just another list.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Do you think Indian culture has a better sense of the quality of spiritual?
You have said that beautifully, and I think I will just support that by saying that there is not a moment in life which cannot be put under a spiritual category.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like very simple thing, that you meditate on the name of God, which is a very common practice throughout all the faith traditions in the world.
Yes.
So, but in Hindu tradition, there's something very interesting. It may be in other traditions as well, that when you wake up, you meditate on this name. When you take bath, you meditate on this name of Krishna. When you are having breakfast, you meditate. When you are doing your work, you meditate on this word. When you are having your lunch, or even when you are copulating with your partner, then you meditate. When you are doing business, you meditate on this. So that shows that how this is like a running thread into that garland of life.
Isn't that fantastic?
Yeah.
And these are different names of the same
Yeah.
divinity.
Yeah.
It's great. You know
Yeah.
what's a little bit similar is all the different saints in Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
They're almost like names in a way.
They must
One
have.
is for
Yeah.
The curious ways that the religions reflect one another is interesting, but because on the face of it, people always just see it as difference rather than similarity.
Mm.
Well,
But these differences converge mostly in the experiential dimension.
right.
In the expression, they differ a lot. But in the experiential dimension, and that dimension is represented best by the spiritual practitioners, the saints, and they have a kind of universal language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, I was worried that we wouldn't get to the end, and I've exacerbated. I didn't think we wouldn't get to the beginning. So,
Okay. That is the danger on talking with Dr. Kaufmann.
So this is for me. I know this is valuable, and our listeners' lives can be greatly enriched by this. But I'm going to be faithful to the timestamp, and
Sure.
there's really the whole of where I wanted to go with this, because you're involved in enormously important work in your vicinity right now. It's almost life or death between kind of the forces of kind of the dark use of land and sacred space versus the chance for light and spiritual edification of the citizens and residents. This is your battle right now. And this is where I should have moved, but I'm okay, because I think what you've offered us is extremely enriching. But I hope we'll be able to find time to continue on this matter of especially your current work for Vrindavan.
Yeah, that will be a great pleasure.
Okay, Acharya, thank you so much for being with us and for all of your time.
Wonderful, wonderful, Dr. Kaufmann.
Thank you.
Have a very good day.
Thank you,
A very
same.
good day.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.